We'll be talking about the best teams in baseball today, but not necessarily the best players on those teams. I've got Sara Sanchez on the line to discuss some players on this year's playoff contenders who deserve a little bit more attention here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here, and on the line, I've got Sara Sanchez of Baseball HQ and Bleed Cubby Blue. Sara, live from a hotel room somewhere in Iowa, is that correct?
Airbnb in Des Moines, where the S's are silent and the city is buzzing, as you know, if you listen to Pat Hughes at all.
All right, we got a minor league game coming up tonight. Who are you scouting?
I'm here for my favorite player on the Cubs 40-man roster these days, Moises Ballesteros, of course. But, we might not get a game. It's the weather here is a little bit dicey, and they're playing a doubleheader. So there's a 9-0 chance the evening part of that gets canceled. But fingers crossed, I will be watching Moises Ballesteros tonight. However, the Cubs also have a handful of interesting corner outfielders. Got Owen Casey, Kevin Alcantara down here. The pitching is all gone because it's all up in the majors, but the batting should be fun.
Well, hopefully you get a game there. How are you feeling about your Cubs after they just lost 2 of 3 to the Bryce Harper-less Phillies? Just got destroyed by Jesus Luzardo. It's no longer Easter, but Jesus rose again on the third start after a couple where he looked rather dead. Gave up 20 runs in a pair of outings, but just yesterday struck out 10, allowed just 1 run on 5 hits in 6 innings. Is Jesus Luzardo back, or can the Cubs not even beat that kind of pitcher? That wouldn't add up based on their season.
I think that Jesus Luzardo probably just fixed some things that were ailing him his last 2 starts. I think that that's kind of the thing that happens throughout the course of a 162-game season. But I admit, when I saw the outline with Jesus Luzardo at the top, I knew that this was some Phillies trash talk coming at me from the one and only Erik Halterman. So, I appreciate that you got that in. Yeah, I am cautiously optimistic about the Cubs. I actually had a piece drop earlier today that looks a little bit at the shape of their season. And the thing that has me that puts that cautious in there, the Cubs have won 15 series this year. The Phillies actually snapped, I think it was a 7 or 8 game series win streak, or 8 series win streak for the Cubs. The problem is that all of the series they've dropped, all of those series are against teams that look to be playing in October. So you've got 2 series against the Phillies, you've got a series against the Dodgers in Japan, you've got a series against the Padres, got a series against the Giants, who have 40 wins right now, got the series against the Tigers, who are the best team in the American League. And so it's one of those situations. Oh, and the Mets, they lost a series to the Mets. So it's kind of like, yes, the Cubs are a good team, and the teams that they need to beat in the postseason, that is where they're struggling. And it also happens to be the starts against guys who will be pitching in the postseason, right? So it's like in the Tigers series, they lost the Tarek Skubal start. They lost the Jack Flaherty start. They won the bullpen game. And so I don't know, man, like that's not a real good pattern if you think that you're a team that's got a long postseason run in front of you, but I hope they prove me wrong.
Yeah, we'll be talking a little bit more about the Cubs later on today's show and about some of those tough teams they have struggled to beat. Our big topic for today will be some interesting players on some of the best teams in baseball, whether that's, the second stars or some role players or, just guys who deserve a little bit more discussion. But before we get to that, let's take a look at some headlines, including the debut of Jacob Misiorowski coming later today, Cardinals at Brewers. Misiorowski's first opponent will be Sonny Gray and the Cardinals. Always fun when you get 2 promising pitchers at opposite ends of their career. Misiorowski, a classic type of pitching prospect, strikes out everybody, also walks everybody. There was a brief period in May where his control seemed better. He's walked more guys his last few starts, but he's up anyway. Do you think Misiorowski is somebody you'll be bidding on quite a bit this weekend? Does it matter how he does in this first start?
It doesn't matter to me at all. Yes, I'm in on Jacob Misiorowski, but I fully expect that he's a player that I'm going to get outbid on because I am a more cautious fab bidder that by nature. I tend to, stick to the $150 bid instead of the $250 bid. And I usually find myself in leagues where somebody is willing to go a little bit higher for players like this than I am. Jacob Misiorowski is lit, and I've been watching him since before the start of the season as part of my gig over at Baseball HQ, where I write the NL Central Playing Time Tomorrow column. And in fact, if you look at last week's edition of that, one of the things I was looking at, I kind of thought that Misiorowski's debut prior to last week would be pushed back a bit because they thought they had Brandon Woodruff coming back, but then that comebacker hitting Woodruff in the elbow at 108 miles per hour reset the clock there. And so it becomes a question, do you really want to ride into this with Quinn Priester and Jose Quintana throwing highly competitive innings for you? And it looks like the Brewers are going to see what they can do with Misiorowski. He throws 103. The command can be an issue, but he really just has that lanky angle, all the velo thing going, and going to be a lot of fun. Hope he absolutely devastates the Cardinals tonight.
Yeah, I bet you do. I've got to say, a poor Brandon Woodruff hit by that comeback. It's just been a brutal couple years of injuries for him. Can we also say poor Kodai Senga, who just left today's start with a hamstring injury? Sounds like he is expected to head to the IL. This was an injury he suffered while covering first base last year. You might remember right after he came back from a shoulder injury, made it one start and then injured his calf. So an unusual set of injuries for Kodai Senga. I imagine we got to hold on to him, though. This doesn't seem like the sort of injury that would last pretty long.
Oh, no. I mean, you got to hold on to Kodai Senga. But at this point, and this is a question for you, Erik. He's kind of a player that's landing on my avoid due to repetitive injury concern list, right? And I know that they're not all the same injury, but like, you know, the calf injury that you were just talking about, we have this now. We have the shoulder stuff from before. I don't know. Kodai Senga is a very interesting pitcher. That ghost fork is incredible, and I think he's going to be on other people's teams, not mine.
Yeah, you know, I felt the same way heading into this season, and then in the Glarf draft that you and I are in together, he fell like 7 rounds or something ridiculous, and guess what? I took him, and he's been my best pitcher so far. So, you know, I'll take the value there, but I'm not surprised with how it's going right now, and he's also somebody who's massively out pitching his peripherals. I don't think he was going to continue being my best pitcher, even if he stayed healthy. The Clark
draft is a very cautious room, though. That is a place
True.
where an injury-laden pitcher would fall substantially more than a normal room. So,
yeah, and it got to the point where, you know what, it was not going to fall anymore. I'm somebody who doesn't take players completely off my board. So in a room like that, I'm likely to end up with a couple pitchers or hitters who are in that category. Another injured pitcher, Cole Reagans. This is a tough one. He, of course, had just returned from a groin strain, made it one start, and is now back on the IL with a much more serious injury for a pitcher, a left rotator cuff strain. At least it's not an elbow. Elbow injuries are often a year, but a shoulder is often, 6 weeks at a minimum. We don't have a clear timeline here yet. Would you be dropping him already in an NFBC league with no bench, or do you think you got to wait until we get some sort of clear timeline, even though, of course, we know timelines often are overly optimistic?
I think Reagans is in the tier of pitchers that I'm not dropping unless I absolutely need the roster spot. But shoulder injuries, to my mind, are actually they're worse than elbow injuries. When I hear it's a shoulder, I have less of a clear idea of what the injury is and when someone is coming back from it. I mean, we were just talking about Brandon Woodruff. I've been waiting to see what he does at the major league level all season because it's just such a different injury. He didn't go have Tommy John, right? Like he had a capsule reconstructed in his shoulder, and we've been waiting to see what he comes back from that. The minor league innings look good, but like, I don't know nobody knows what the recovery from that injury is going to be. And so Reagan's super fun pitcher to watch, definitely in the tier where I'm holding him if I can. To be clear, I'm the girl who drafted Andrew Painter and is holding onto him in a couple of leagues where I want to make sure that I have that one rookie who's already on my bench wherever I can hold him. But I am worried that we're not going to see Reagans again for a while.
Yeah, another pitcher that I'm pretty worried we're not going to see for a while is Shane McClanahan. He had started throwing some bullpen sessions as he works his way back from that triceps nerve issue that he suffered in spring training, but It's now been revealed that he's in shutdown mode again and is visiting a nerve specialist. Is this one where if you had been holding this long, this is time to cut bait, or do you want to at least see what we hear from that specialist?
Again, if you have he's your one guy that you're holding on to, you want to see the results of the specialist, I won't ding you for it. But I think that this is a situation similar to what we were talking about with Sengo, where there's just so many injuries and the injuries are so persistent that you can't be holding on to Shane McClanahan and somebody else, right? Like he's got to be your one guy. So I really do think that I'm nervous about Shane McClanahan. I'm glad that I was not particularly in on him this season.
Yeah, and in general, betting on these pitchers the first year back from major injury, there are a lot of ways it can go wrong, as we're seeing with McClanahan, and as we might see in 2027 with Jackson Jobe. Unfortunately, it's been revealed that he will need Tommy John surgery. He'd already been on the IL for a couple weeks, so you can go ahead and drop him, of course. But how about one bit of positive pitcher news? Reed Detmers got a save yesterday for the Angels. Now, he's not taking the closer job from Kenley Jansen. Jansen had pitched, I believe it was back-to-back days and 4 of the last 5. But I think most people expect that Kenley Jansen will not still be an Angel come August. And Reed Detmers, the next man up, he's been on a great run. His overall season numbers are still pretty poor, 5.22 ERA, 153 whip. But if you look at his game log, it kind of looks like he took some time adjusting to the bullpen. And at this point, 11 straight scoreless outings, 18 strikeouts against just 4 walks. Reed Detmers, is he worth picking up now in hopes of saves in August and September?
I think he is. Reed Detmers is one of those pitchers that we found interesting in the past for a handful of reasons. And, even bad teams are going to get saves at some point in time. Although I will say, I don't know if you caught that piece from The Athletic earlier this week where they sort of did the anonymous player survey results. One of the things that jumped out at me was the line that one of the anonymous players had about the Angels, which is that they just don't really seem to have a plan for anything. And that makes me less likely to put them as one of the cornerstones of anything that I'm doing, right? Like if you want to take a flyer and spec on Reed Detmers, go for it, but be ready to cut him. He's not going to sit there forever.
Yeah, as somebody who drafted way too much Yusei Kikuchi based on last year's numbers and just wasn't really accounting for the fact that this year's Yusei Kikuchi is on the Angels. Yeah, I'm feeling you on that one. But let's move on to the main topic of today's show. What we're going to look at today is we're going to march down the overall MLB standings, take a look at who the top fantasy earner, according to the RotoWire earned auction values page, has been for each of these top teams, and also talk about one player each who we think deserves more attention. And if you're following along with us in the live stream, feel free to shout out some names who you think deserve more attention on these teams as well. But the best team in baseball right now, Sarah, is the New York Mets, 44-24, leading the NL, leading all of Major League Baseball by half a game over the Tigers, who we'll get to in a minute. The best New York Met in fantasy so far has not been Juan Soto, although we might talk about him in a second. It's been Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso so far hitting .302. Is he allowed to do that? Apparently, his XBA is .313, so this doesn't even seem like luck. And hey, he's also got 17 homers. Is this for real? Is Pete Alonso going to finish the year as the highest earning Met?
It appears to be for real. And I think that Pete Alonso is one of those tales of didn't quite get the deal that he wanted in free agency last year and is here to just double down and prove that he deserves that deal going forward. It's been amazing to watch the revenge of the polar bear. And you could sort of see in the metrics from last season that Pete Alonso was getting a little bit unlucky, but I don't know that I thought he was getting unlucky to the tune of over 300 batting average with the power that he has. I agree. Pete Alonso has been a revelation for this Mets team.
All right. And what Met do you think we should talk about? Who deserves more discussion on the Mets right now?
Well, so he doesn't deserve more discussion because he's gotten all the discussion. But the most interesting player on the Mets for me right now is Juan Soto. And it is precisely because of the discourse that has been out there around Juan Soto. I mean, if you were looking at your alerts even 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's like Juan Soto is too passive. Juan Soto isn't very good. What has happened to Juan Soto? Can Juan Soto handle being the highest paid player in baseball and all of these types of things. And when truly, if you look at the breakdown of what Juan Soto was doing, there's just not all that much in his metrics that you should have been concerned by. This was clearly a batted ball streak, and he was a little bit more passive than he had been. But more passive Juan Soto in March and April put up a WRC plus of 117. Admittedly, well off his career averages, but still 17% better than the league average. It was 123 in May. In June, he has gone right back to what we've seen from Juan Soto, the Juan Soto that we know and love, and he is rapidly climbing the player evaluation boards. And so I feel like if we were going to spend all that time in March through May questioning what was wrong with Juan Soto, we owe him a little bit of love now for the fact that he looks like he's exactly who he's always been, and his WOBA is back in like the 370 range.
Yeah, Soto's strikeout rate, 16%. That's 1 point better than his career mark. His barrel rate, 15%. That's 1 point better than his career mark. Sure looks Juan Soto-ian to me. Did you have him as the 8th best player? That's about where he was going in drafts back in March. If so, do you regret that at all? You know, given he was always maybe likely to be at risk of a tough start, moving to a new team, and the park's difficult. Do you think if we redrafted today, are you at least a little bit lower on Juan Soto, as, you know, maybe more in that Vlad Guerrero, Yordan Alvarez range of the draft? Or do you think 8 is about where he'd go again?
8 is about where he would go again, on my board at least. And I would take him ahead of both of the guys that you just named. That said, I'm a girl who has Yordan Alvarez in a bunch of spots, and that is not working well for me at all this season. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. I think that the hit tool that Juan Soto brings to the table, especially in an on-base percentage league, is so elite that he really is one of those top 10 players year in, year out, period, the end, until he hits his aging decline. And so I will bank on that more times than not. A similar player who kind of like fell a couple of times this year, where it was like, oh, well, I don't know, like maybe I want the steals more. I can't take Aaron Judge number 2 or 3 overall. I mean, I ended up getting a lot of Aaron Judge in the 4 spot, and I'm super happy about it because Aaron Judge is the best hitter in baseball, and it is not particularly close. Juan Soto is in that tier of player, and there just aren't that many guys in that tier.
Well, I'm guessing we'll have a couple things to say about Aaron Judge when we get to the Yankees, but one more interesting Met that I think deserves to be highlighted, David Peterson. He just shut out the Nationals, who throws complete games these days. Actually, both he and Spencer Schwellenbach threw complete games yesterday, so I guess those guys do. But David Peterson now down to a 2.49 ERA and a 1.19 whip on the year. Not somebody who strikes out a lot of batters, 21.5%. He'd actually previously in his career been in the mid to high 20s with poor ERAs. This version of David Peterson isn't missing a ton of bats, but a very high ground ball rate, 57%. Do you trust David Peterson as quite a good starter going forward, or do you still view him as somebody who you might not use against every opponent?
I think he's probably still in the streaming and or 2-start pitcher mode for me. However, I think with some of the injuries we were just talking about to elite guys, he is rapidly climbing to where he crosses over that threshold to a guy that you just start no matter what. That said, I think that line has fallen a bit, right? Because of so many injuries at the top.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's move on to the next best team in baseball, the Detroit Tigers, 44-25, best team in the American League. Did you have the Tigers as the best team in the league heading into the season? I'm guessing no.
No, I did not.
Yeah, quite a surprise. It's an interesting team. They're getting there through depth, certainly. There's some elements of the Brewers or the Rays to this team, but there's also Tarik Skubal, who has been the top earner on the Tigers so far, and maybe the best pitcher in baseball. If you could have anybody starting Game 7 of the World Series right now, would you pick somebody other than Skubal? He's got a 2.16 ERA, 0.82 whip. His strikeout rate was already 30% last year. Now it's 33. His walk rate was already 4.5% last year. Now it's 2.2. There's nothing this guy can't do right now. I think that I would trust him over anybody else. How about you?
Absolutely. I think Tarik Skubal has been unbelievable. Just got to see him with my own eyes when they were playing the Cubs. And truly, I mean, he's the best pitcher in baseball right now. The only guy who I think might have an argument is Paul Skeens, and Paul Skeens doesn't have anywhere near the team behind him to rack up the wins or anything like that. So that's a travesty in and of itself happening there in Pittsburgh. I am 100% with you. If I need somebody to win a playoff game today, it is Tarek Skubal, and it is not close.
All right, but who are some underappreciated Tigers? It's a deep roster with a lot of guys making contributions. Who do you want to highlight? I think I got a guess.
I mean, I think that everybody who knows me already knows where I'm going with this, but Javier Baez, comeback player of the year, is a lot of fun and fantasy relevant again, I think is the most important nod for Javi, right? Now, admittedly, he's no longer fantasy relevant in the you're going to draft him in one of the top 10 rounds as your starting shortstop situation. He's right on that line of cuttable or not. I did just drop him in Tout Wars when I got some guys back from injury, but Javier Baez is having quite the comeback season. And because we know that he had hip surgery at the end of last season and is playing healthy again for the first time in a while, it makes you wonder if this is in fact a sustainable road for Javi. He's hitting 269. He's getting on base at a 299 clip, which is right in line with what he was doing when he was sort of peak Javier Baez back in the day. He doesn't have the power he used to. It's only 6 home runs so far this year, but he's only striking out 23.4% of the time. And frankly, baseball is more fun when Javier Baez is relevant and doing fun things. I have this theory of him that he needs a crowd to perform to his maximum potential. And I think that the vibes in Detroit being what they are, having that new role in center field, being kind of the utility guy, making El Mago plays everywhere, I think that has been really good for Javi, and I fully believe he's going to be the comeback player in the AL this season. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you bought into that narrative about him, because do you remember which year for the Cubs he was terrible?
2020, no crowd.
Exactly. He had a 599 OPS in 2020. That was sandwiched between 3 seasons, where his OPS was over 800. I'm hesitant to buy into narrative with any player, but I feel like I've seen Javi Baez do this in person, as have you, even down the end of his time in Chicago when he was not necessarily quite the same guy he used to be. On those days when you got a big crowd all chanting his name, he seemed like he was going to hit 2 homers every time. So now that he's on a Tigers team that's competitive, that's having a lot of fun, I think also the fact that he was playing center field earlier in the season just gave him a new puzzle to work out, something for him to focus on and care about. And again, hesitant to buy into too much narrative, but he does feel like one of those guys where the narratives really seem to line up with reality.
100%. And he even talked about, I'm going to do anything for the team. He came up as a center fielder, played a little bit of center in the minors, but watching him do all of the El Mago stuff that he can do, he's out there making basket catches like Willie Mays. He's out there diving for balls and doubling guys off first. He's got an electric arm. He's got an electric glove. The baseball IQ is off the charts. And, he's only 32 years old. If that hip surgery that he had put him back together in such a way that he can keep this up, there's no reason that Javier Baez can't be a guy for a couple more years, and at least for this season. So if he's available on one of your waiver wires, he's certainly a guy who can help you out. Plus, he's got so much position flexibility right now between that outfield eligibility, the shortstop eligibility from last year. He's also been playing a little bit of third, so you can cover a lot of bases with Javier Baez.
Yeah, and that also means he has multiple routes to remain in the lineup, even as the Tigers get healthier again. They're fairly healthy right now compared to where they've been previous times this season. It's basically just Matt Vierling on the IL. The underappreciated Tiger I want to mention here is Dylan Dingler. I don't think I saw this coming. He did absolutely nothing in 27 games last year, a 5.05 OPS, 1 homer, but this season, Dylan Dingler in 52 games has a respectable 6 homers, and he's hitting 284. Also playing excellent defense as well. Look under the hood a bit. The barrel rate is quite solid, 8.5%. The strikeout and walk numbers are pretty horrible. 28% strikeout rate with a 2.6% walk rate. But, the offensive bar at catcher is not that high. How confident are you in Dylan Dingler continuing to clear that bar enough to matter in pretty much any 2-catcher league? I don't think we're talking 1-catcher league anytime soon.
Confident enough that he is one of the guys that I have replacing a hurt Miguel Amaya in a handful of spots right now. And honestly, For me, the most important thing at catcher is, does it look like it is sustainable to not hurt you? And does the playing time exist, right? So if you have playing time and you have a baseline that is not going to ding you because of the playing time, that is where I consider a catcher viable. And Dylan Dingler more than clears that line for right now. If he is a guy that you could feel comfortable streaming later, there are some interesting guys who are getting healthy who could maybe take that spot later, right? But he is right on that line of viable for a 2-catcher situation, and I've got him on a handful of teams.
All right, let's jump to the next team, the New York Yankees, who at 41-25 are second in the AL, first in the AL East, but a game and a half back of the Tigers. As of right now, the road to the pennant goes through Detroit. Not sure. I would bet on that at this point. I think that I would trust the Yankees overtaking them eventually. As long as Aaron Judge stays healthy, he is obviously the top earning Yankee so far. He's the top earning player so far. And I'm pretty happy about this as somebody who did rank him number one heading into the season. Did you as well?
I did.
You had not remotely surprised by any of this. I told you so enough about it already, or do you want to a couple more times?
I kind of would like to a couple of more times. There were some places where Aaron Judge fell to me at like pick 3 or 4 because people put like Jose Ramirez up there. So, don't get me wrong, Jose Ramirez is having a great season, but like having Aaron Judge fall to you at 4 or 5 and then seeing this season is out of control. One of the things that I really love about Aaron Judge, though, that people are talking about all the time, but we need to talk about it more so we truly appreciate it. The season we're seeing from Aaron Judge, at least through June, is historic, and none of us have seen this since the steroid era. Period. The end. And if the steroid era hadn't happened, it's unclear any of us would have ever seen this in our lifetimes. Those are the types of numbers that Aaron Judge is putting up right now. They are in the Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, best offensive seasons of all time tier, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy it while it lasts because honestly, my AL team is the Red Sox, and I love Aaron Judge.
Yeah, Aaron Judge, of course, the last 2 times he stayed fully healthy, he put up over 11 WAR, according to Fangraphs. He had WRC pluses north of 200, but he's even better this year. He's at 246 in that category, hitting 394, on base 490. Just incredible start. I'll just give you one bad Aaron Judge stat because this has confused me. Aaron Judge this year, a 22.8% strikeout rate. That's basically league average, 44th percentile. But his whiff rate, according to StatCast, is just in the 2nd percentile. That seems difficult. Do you think that means probably his strikeout rate is set to rise pretty quickly and therefore he's not going to hit anything close to 394? I mean, we don't really need any reason to say he's not going to hit close to 394. The reason is that people don't do that. But does that give you any particular pause? Or is Aaron Judge somebody who somehow can avoid striking out even though he's whiffing a lot? I don't even know how you would do that.
No, I actually, that does give me a little bit of pause. The strikeout rate, I thought that was where you were going. I didn't realize the whiff rate on top of that. But the strikeout rate is the one stat where I'm like, this is how Aaron Judge is different from the Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, even Barry Bonds at his finest points of his career. And so that gives me some pause. I do think, however, it's worth noting that none of those players played in the era of pitching that we see right now. And so we don't really know what the comparative with strikeout rates could be given the arms that Aaron Judge is facing right now. Definitely gives me pause. I don't think that I would put down, any amount of money I couldn't stand to lose on Aaron Judge finishing the season this close to 400 or over 400. I'm still going to enjoy watching one of the greatest offensive seasons I've ever seen in my life to date until the magic runs out.
Yeah, absolutely. Who are some lesser Yankees who deserve a little bit more attention?
I think that we should talk about Paul Goldschmidt's resurgence a little bit more because I thought that Cody Bellinger was going to go to Yankee Stadium and just be the guy and like short porch and the pull fly balls or whatever. But it turns out that the guy who was going to take full advantage of all of that was Paul Goldschmidt after we all kind of wrote him off as being done after last season. And Paul Goldschmidt is really just having himself quite a year in his new home, and I'm pretty happy about it. Now, admittedly, he's pulling the ball 42% of the time, so we know how he's doing it, and we know how he's putting up the numbers, but he's currently slashing 312, 367, 457. Those look like the types of numbers he was putting up at the heart of his best years in St. Louis. It's not quite the power metrics that you got in St. Louis, but Paul Goldschmidt, absolutely resurgent. And I'm kind of digging watching him in his new home.
Yeah, I would say I was not expecting much at all from Paul Goldschmidt. We've seen several older first basemen trend downwards in recent years, and usually the trend doesn't reverse itself, but apparently it can at times. You've got one other Yankee on here that you think deserves another shout out, an outfielder.
Yeah, I put Trent Grisham on my list as well because Trent Grisham has done with his power numbers, have done everything that I thought Cody Bellinger was going to do going to Yankee Stadium. And I actually, about a month ago, I think I posted on Blue Sky that I owe Trent Grisham an apology because I just didn't really see this type of future for him at Yankee Stadium. He has been a lifesaver and was basically undrafted in a bunch of places. So if you got him off the waiver wire early, he's probably carrying your team right now. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why he'd be undrafted when he hadn't hit 200 since 2021, but he's hitting 242, and that's less than what StatCast thinks he deserves. They've got a 259 XBA for him, so no real reason to believe that's suddenly going to disappear. Speaking of suddenly disappearing, I want to talk about Ben Rice as the most interesting Yankee. Now, he had an outstanding start to the season, but Rice's numbers have fallen off with each subsequent month here. If you look at it by WRC Plus, March and April, he was a 168, one of the best hitters in the league. In May, just a 105, barely above average. And so far, through 11 days in June, a 40 WRC Plus. He has gone quite cold. Also, he has not managed to hit lefties really at all, striking out 30% of the time against them compared to just 20% against righties. He's hitting just 180 against left-handers. But there was also an interesting bit of news that just came up, which was that he could get some starts at catcher soon, with Giancarlo Stanton set to return from the injured list. So maybe, especially in leagues where only 5 games get you eligibility, we could be seeing a big boost to Ben Rice's value there. But where are you at on Ben Rice these days? Do you think this is a big breakout, that he's going to continue being a key piece for the Yankees going forward, or was it just a good month?
It was a good month. I am still a little skeptical of Ben Rice, but I want to say I've been skeptical of Ben Rice before, and I've been wrong before. I do think the catcher eligibility would be a huge boon to his value, particularly in those leagues, like you stated, where the catcher eligibility comes at you quick. I think it is telling that the Yankees have made a bunch of moves to keep Ben Rice in their lineup. And so that tells me that the Yankees want the Ben Rice story to work, and they're willing to play around with lots of different parts of their lineup construction to make it happen. I'm not all the way sold yet. He's not one of my guys or a capital D dude for me at the moment, but I am intrigued, and I would like to subscribe to Ben Rice's newsletter.
Yeah, Rice has still started against at least 2 of the last 3 lefties that the Royals have faced this week. So, like you're saying, it does seem like the Yankees want him to be part of the future. All right, let's move to your Chicago Cubs, who are 41-27, the 4th best record in baseball right now, 2nd best in the NL, 3 games back of the Mets. Is this right where you expected, Sarah? I don't think so.
It is not what I expected, but I'm happy about it. I think that there's a lot going on in the city of Chicago right now that validates something, that this team has been lacking a superstar since they basically traded the World Series core away. And it was really hard to tell what the impact of a superstar would be on the lineup because you had a bunch of above average players, both defensively and offensively, already on the team, right? Like Ian Happ is an above average offensive and defensive player. Seiya Suzuki's an above average offensive player. Dansby Swanson is an excellent defensive player, pretty average offensive player. But, you had this amalgamation of guys who were all in that slightly above average tier. Kyle Tucker being in that lineup transforms that lineup and makes it so much longer and harder to hit against that it's almost unbelievable. However, that's what they've been missing. They've been missing the superstar, the guy who is going to headline the entire thing. And I mean, you're seeing it right now up and down their lineup, but especially with the guy that you've got listed as the best fantasy player so far, because I don't think that he has the season that he would have if Kyle Tucker wasn't in that lineup.
Yeah, when you launched into this discussion of a superstar, I thought that you were about to be talking about Pete Crow Armstrong, who has been the top earning Cub in fantasy this year, not Kyle Tucker. Do you think that that will be the case at the end of the season? I guess that will be my way of asking you how real this is for Pete Crow Armstrong. Would you take him or Kyle Tucker the rest of the way?
Well, I've got a question for you in a second because I want to know where, if we were drafting today, where you think Pete Crow Armstrong would go. But before we get to that question, here's what I know about PCA. The glove is real. The glove is going to keep him in the lineup at all times. I've rarely seen a defender that can do the types of things Pete Crow Armstrong can do. And I know the Javi Baez comparison happens a lot. I actually think they're very different players. Javi is a high baseball IQ player who does a lot of things players aren't doing, but they work out because he's got super good fast twitch muscles and good instincts. Pete Crow Armstrong runs the best routes I've ever seen. He runs them extremely fast, and he has an arm that makes you pay for any step that you have out of line when he is in the outfield. I'm not sure his baseball IQ is quite the same level as Javier Baez's is, but it doesn't matter. Half of the plays that PCA makes look easier than they are because of how he is making them. And there was an excellent piece in MLB, a StatCast profile that they did on PCA and his plays, where they showed side by side 10% catches, PCA doing the catch in one instance, another very good, I forget who, but above average center fielder doing the same catch in another instance. Other center fielder doesn't make the catch, dives, misses the ball goes to the wall. PCA doesn't even have to dive. He just runs, catches the ball, throws it in. You don't even, it doesn't even register to you that this is a 5-star catch because he is so good at getting to where the baseball should be. And so I believe in that part of PCA's game. The part that I'm still a little skeptical of, mainly because of exactly how much he swings and misses, is the hit tool. I'm loving the hit tool, but I'm just not sure PCA is going to hit 45 home runs ever in a season. And that is sort of what he's on pace for right now. It's really fun to watch at the moment, but it's unbelievable to watch. The speed is real. The glove is real. The power I'm a little skeptical of. And I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, there's a lot to be at least sort of skeptical of, and that's the problem. I love everything he's doing, and I think he's an incredible real baseball player with that incredible center field defense. Already has 3.6 WAR according to Fangraphs. The question is, could you use a second round pick, maybe even a late first rounder, but I think probably a second rounder is where I would guess people would start thinking about him right now. Could you use a second round pick on a player who has a 305 on base percentage in his breakout season? Could you use a second round pick on a player who has a 559 OPS against lefties, striking out a third of the time while walking just 2.6% of the time against them? Now, do I think he's always going to be that poor against lefties? Probably not. We're talking about a guy who's still just 23, and we've seen plenty of development already. But those are real distinct flaws. And also, it's only a 42% hard hit rate. He's not hitting the ball that hard. What he's doing is absolutely maxing out pulled fly balls, which if he keeps doing that, then he's going to keep hitting way more homers than you'd expect for his merely good hard hit data. I guess 2.5 months is probably enough to say that's the kind of batted ball profile he's going to have going forward. But is it going to be quite this extreme? I'm taking a look at where some similar power speed guys went in the main event this year.
Well, I already know know where the run is. It is the Jarren Duran, Jackson Chourio, Michael Harris, the second run. And so here's my question for you. And I'm honestly not sure what my answer is. I watch as much PCA as anybody. Is PCA in that tier? Is he in the tier where you're going to pull the trigger before you pull the trigger on Jackson Chourio? Because that is the question you have to ask yourself if you were redrafting today.
Yeah, and I wonder, is he going to go 13 again after what he's done so far? He hasn't actually taken much of a step forward. I think Jackson Chourio, he's showing that he still has an incredibly high floor with that power and speed, but it's been a little bit disappointing. I think the guy who looks the most like PCA maybe, or the guy who back in March looks the most like PCA now, is maybe O'Neal Cruz. He went 33 in the main event. He's somebody who we knew could have some power. We knew he could run as well. We knew there was very big upside there, but we also weren't totally sure about what the floor might be and whether or not he was a complete player who was going to put it all together. But if PCA even only sort of cools off the rest of the year, his year-end numbers are going to be just so much better than those guys you mentioned. If we're going to say, would you really bet on him doing it? He's already done it. So to say he's not going to would feel a little crazy. I still feel somebody like Jackson Merrill feels safer and would probably go in a similar round. So I think it might come down to just how much you want to chase the absolute upside versus the floor. But I think 25 to 35-ish would be where I'd peg PCA as of right now. We could do a whole episode on him, but we could also do a whole episode on most of the Cubs here. So give me at least one other Cub who you think deserves more attention.
Let's talk about Daniel Palencia, who is currently closing games for the Cubs and doing it with style. We've known that Daniel Palencia could throw 100 miles per hour for a couple of seasons now, but we also knew that the walks were a problem and he really didn't have the command that you wanted him to. And at the start of the season, even in high leverage bullpen situations, he was still walking too many guys. There was still a little bit of a wildness issue. However, the second he got that closer role, start from the time that he got his first save, he has walked like one batter in the 7 appearances that he has had since then. Daniel Palencia looks like a dude. The part of his game that he was lacking, which was the control piece, is almost gone. And the other thing I love about Daniel Palencia, if you watch one of his innings, he starts out almost every first fastball that he throws is about 98, 99. And then by the time he's thrown his second or third fastball, it's up there at like 100. The last fastball is always the fastest. It's up there at like 102. And you're watching him just kind of like gain steam through the inning. He's coming out to Daddy Yankees Gasolina and he's throwing gas at Wrigley Field. And he just seems to have gotten more powerful as the situation has gotten to be higher leverage. I love that for Daniel Palencia. I love that for the Cubs. It does make me wonder what happens when Porter Hodge is healthy, because I don't know that Porter Hodge is getting that job back with Daniel Palencia pitching the way he is right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as Uncle Ted mentioned in the chat here, Palencia did get rocked in his last outing. So if he has, one more bad outing,
not a safe situation though, right? Not a safe situation. Am I correct? I think.
I'll check the box score there, but I
think it was an extra innings, like runner on second type of situation.
Checks out. Do you think that if he has one more bad outing before Hodge comes back, do you think Hodge will get a save chance, or do you think that Palencia has a firm enough grip on it that they're going to treat him like the closer and give him a little bit longer leash?
I think that Craig Counsell wants to mix and match at the moment. I don't think the Cubs want to put the label of closer on anybody because that costs them more in arbitration. But I do think of the arms that they have available to them to potentially close. Daniel Palencia looks most like the guy who fits the bill. And the thing that was holding him back is the thing that he has mostly worked out. Props on the last outing. You were absolutely correct about that. But I do think it's the thing that he has mostly worked out in that save situation closer role. And so I think he gets a little bit longer leash there. I do think that means if you're hanging on to like Ryan Presley because you're dreaming of some Ryan Presley save someday, you should probably let those dreams go. I have Porter Hodge in places where I have IL spots, like in Tout Wars where there's an unlimited IL, just to sort of see what happens when Porter Hodge is healthy. But I've dropped Porter Hodge in any place where where roster space and bench spaces are an issue.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I got to ask you about the Cub that I just can't quit, and that is Ben Brown, who has a 5.71 ERA and a 1.47 WHIP, but ERA estimators like FIP, XFIP, Sierra, they're all in the 330s. I'm pretty sure he's got something like an 8 ERA in games where I use him and a 1 ERA in games where I don't, because he's been incredibly inconsistent. And I thought some of that might have had to do with the fact that he was just a 2-pitch guy, but there is this recent development. He's picked up the kick change, using it 8-9% of the time in recent starts, which might be all he needs. I thought that things were trending really well when he gave up a combined 2 runs in 13 innings with a 16-2 strikeout to walk rate in his 2 starts before this one yesterday against the Phillies. Then the Phillies knocked him around for 6 runs. Is Ben Brown, should I just get rid of him so that I don't keep getting all of his bad starts? Or should I start him with confidence? Because again, the ERA estimators love him and he's taking the step forward in theory by adding that 3rd pitch.
Well, so You and I are having the same Ben Brown experience because I am doing the exact same. Like, I'm going to put him in no, he's got to go on the bench. No, I'm going to put him in. I think that Ben Brown won three performances ago, he had an opener for him. They had Drew Pomerantz open for him. And Craig Counsell talked about that specifically as letting him come into a different situation, not having to face those guys at the top of the lineup a third time through until later in the game. It really did seem to work out for Brown. Now, he's not the only pitcher in the Cubs rotation that has been done for. That also happened with Colin Ray in his last couple of starts. Drew Pomerantz has been the opener anytime that the Cubs have gone to that. And by the way, speaking of interesting Cubs, Drew Pomerantz yet to give up an earned run in the year of our Lord 2025 after not pitching in the major league since 2021, which is wild. But anyway, story for another day. I think that Ben Brown is an excellent pitcher, and I think the Cubs want him to be a starter. So I think he keeps getting opportunities. I do think that there are he can struggle early in games, and he can struggle when he is. It's like he has to be real fine with that pitch mix. He's not, and if those things are not working, then Ben Brown can look a little bit ugly. When he's on, though, that is one of the guys that I feel like is just, he has no hit wipeout stuff. The last thing I'll say about Ben Brown, if he's on your team, I'm holding him everywhere I can as long as I can, because we were just talking about, can Daniel Palencia lose the closer role to Porter Hodge? I don't think so, but I do think Daniel Palencia could lose the closer role to Ben Brown if Ben Brown transitioned to the bullpen. Like, I think that if Ben Brown winds up being in the bullpen, he's absolutely not a middle relief arm. He is the guy who is closing games because he has that type of stuff. I think the Cubs want to keep him in the starter role for a while longer, so I don't think that's coming in the short term. But I do think that Ben Brown is the most interesting back of the starting rotation reliever type situation.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Brown is throwing some key relief innings in the playoffs, and that could come against the Dodgers, who right now are the third seed in the NL, half a game behind the Cubs. They're sitting 41-28, 3.5 games behind the New York Mets, still leading the NL West, but it's a real race for the Dodgers this year. We often talk about the fact that they're a shoe-in for a bye in March, and that's not necessarily the case this year. It's a competitive NL, but that's not due to any fault from Shohei Ohtani, who remains the top earning Dodger and the second top earner overall behind Aaron Judge. Any worries at all for Shohei Ohtani in leagues where you might have him because of the fact that he's about to start pitching again? It's going to be an unusual situation for him. He's going to basically be making his rehab appearances in the majors. I expect, a 1-inning appearance, then 2, then 3, then 4 in the big leagues, because you're not going to send him to the minors to rehab because you can't take his bat out of the lineup. The situation is just going to be weird and unprecedented. Does that give you worries at all? Or, it's Shohei Ohtani?
It's Shohei Ohtani. I'm not terribly worried about it. I think that if I'm thinking about this from a real baseball perspective, not a fantasy baseball perspective, the thing that I think, I wonder how Shohei pitching impacts his role on the Dodgers, because you have to imagine that if he is struggling even a tiny amount, that he could wind up in a circumstance where he just goes back to being the DH and they try to piece together their rotation in other ways. I do think that there's hey, if the pitching thing isn't working out, we're just going to go back to this designated hitter thing and we'll try to figure out how to get you back into the rotation next year, those types of things. But every time I've worried about Shohei Ohtani in terms of coming back from Tommy John, will he be as effective? And all of my worries have been quelled. So I'm just not going to worry about Shohei Ohtani anymore. I think that if he is pitching at the level that he was pitching at prior to surgery and keeps up this pace as a hitter, we're just going to be seeing something special there, and something that even Aaron Judge can't match.
Yeah, sounds about right. How about some lesser Dodgers? Everybody is a lesser Dodger than Shohei Ohtani, but somebody down the lineup who you think deserves a little bit more attention.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about Andy Pages enough. I think he's having a real nice season for the Dodgers in the outfield over there, and he's so young, 24 years old. He's hitting 285, 327, 480. He's got 12 home runs already on the season, and he's putting up a WRC plus of 127. Right now, I think that Andy Pages is a super interesting dude, and I think you could have gotten him fairly late in drafts, if I recall correctly. I mean, we're talking one of the last few rounds. So Andy Pages is one of those dudes that I'm super interested in, particularly with some of, all of the Dodgers have some playing time questions. I feel like every time you draft a Dodger, you're drafting 4/5 of a complete playing time situation, unless you've got Mookie Betts or Freddie Freeman. But if you're willing to put up with that, you can get some really great numbers from them, and Pages is putting up a nice season.
Yeah, he certainly is. Much more well-rounded, too, than I thought he was going to be. With those 12 homers, 6 steals, 285, contributing across the board. But that is sort of frustrating for me because my most interesting Dodger is competing with Pages for playing time. That's Hye-Sung Kim, who I guess is maybe the new Chris Taylor or something. That's the idea. Also, Tommy Edman is that player, so maybe they've got multiple. I guess this is how the Dodgers like building their team. A lot of guys who can give you middle infield and center field at the same time. Doesn't hurt. Hye-Sung Kim came over from Korea this winter and was optioned to start the year. And I was a little bit worried that that was buyer's remorse from the Dodgers, realizing, wait a second, this guy is not going to hack it in the majors. Well, that was not the case at all, I don't think, based on his numbers in very limited opportunities. In 69 plate appearances since he's returned, he's got a pair of homers. That's more power than I would have expected for a guy who maxed out at 11 homers in Korea. Also has 6 steals, again, in just 69 plate appearances. If I quickly do the math there and prorate that over 600, that's 52 steal pace over the course of a full season if he was a full-time player. Also, he's hitting .391. Now, it's taken a .479 BABIP to get him there, so that's not going to continue. But even the XBA at .287, that's pretty good. It's just a matter of where exactly is he going to play and how often. But Kim has now started 4 of the last 5 games. Do you like the player enough? Do you think there's enough playing time here that you'd be trying to acquire him in a lot of places where he's still out there? Or do you just think it's going to be really tough to figure out when you can actually use him?
Like I said, with the Dodgers, I think if you're willing to accept that there's a 4/5 playing time situation and that is going to benefit them, right? Like they're going to have better numbers because they're going to be put in the best possible matchups for them, but you're going to lose a little bit of that volume. I think Kim is a great player to invest in. But I do think that we have hit on something here in terms of the redundancies in the Dodger system. Like for most teams, it is enough for them to have the one middle infielder outfield guy. The Dodgers have to have 2 of those, right? Like the outfield situation is so crowded that you've got a guy like Pages who's, he sits every 5th or 6th game and you have to deal with that. It's it's that type of situation across the board for the Dodgers, unless they're one of those elite superstars. I also think that the Dodgers offense is so good that they make up for it with the team around them by having runners on all the time who are being hit all the time. So yeah, I'm super into Kim. Curious how high his draft cost is going to go, because that will dictate whether I get any of him on my teams next year.
Yeah, again, I really like the player. And if the draft cost stays muted, there's going to be a lot of formats where I think he can help you quite a bit. It's really going to depend on how often and where he plays, I think, the rest of the year. But jumping on to the next team in the standings, the San Francisco Giants, they are actually only half a game back of the Dodgers right now. 4th overall in the NL, 4 games back of the Mets. I don't think many people saw this one coming. Also, the best fantasy player for the Giants is not Logan Webb, who's having an outstanding season. It's not Robbie Ray, who's also having an outstanding season. It's actually Elliot Ramos. Do you buy him as somebody who could be leading this team in fantasy value by the end of the year? Is Elliot Ramos a 25-year-old outfielder for real?
I think he is, actually. Elliot Ramos hits the ball extremely hard, and I like that. He was actually one of my sleepers coming into this season, and he is sort of paying off for me in the places where I was able to get him. I with you, though, I think the most interesting thing about this Giants team is that they are in the conversation we're having right now at all. The Giants having 40 wins here, right, heading into the second week of June is not something that I saw coming. I didn't think this team was pieced together in such a way that was going to be an outcome that could happen. Second place in the NL West was not something that I saw coming. So maybe the Giants' overall performance is the thing that I am most surprised by on the Giants roster. But yeah, Elliot Ramos has all of the skills to be a power bat and to do to hit all of the home runs. So I'm a pretty big fan of him as a player.
All right. How about among the lower earning Giants? Who is someone else you're a pretty big fan of?
So the interesting player here for me is Camilo Doval, because I think that most of us thought that he was done and dusted as that closer situation, despite the fact that he threw really hard. He wound up getting demoted to AAA. He lost the closer job. Ryan Walker was the dude coming into this season. And yet here we are. The closer again is Camilo Doval, and he's still throwing over 100, and that's fun stuff. So I'm fairly interested in him. I have him in a couple of draft and holds where I spec'd really late on him as a guy who could take the closer job later, and I'm really glad that I did.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to Camilo Doval here is that the strikeout and walk numbers not great. The strikeouts are down to 23.6%, and the walks were always a bit of an issue. That's still the case. Seems like he's got his manager's trust in the ninth inning, and he's delivering. And when that happens, you don't expect a guy to be removed from the role. But I do have to mention a player who I almost put down as my most interesting and who Uncle Ted has mentioned here in the chat, Randy Rodriguez, a reliever who I don't think I had many thoughts about heading into this season. But in 29 and a third innings, Randy Rodriguez has 43 strikeouts against just 3 walks, just 2 earned runs. That's good for an 0.61 ERA and an 0.61 whip. Is there enough here that you'd be stashing him in a deeper league, either just to maybe use him to help your ratios, or maybe suspecting that he could take over for Doval eventually?
If you're in a place where there are no closers on the waiver wire for you to speculate on, and you need a handful more saves later, he is exactly the type of reliever that I'm interested in, because you look for guys who don't walk a ton of guys, who have wicked strikeout stuff, who could step into that role in the event that something happens to a shaky closer. I agree with you that Doval has a little bit of question marks still amongst his skill set. So yeah, Randy Rodriguez, somebody I'm definitely interested in. And as Uncle Ted added, Doval will Doval.
Yes, fair enough. My most interesting Giant, I'm going to continue the theme of picking former Kiwoom heroes here. Jung-Hoo Lee, who we did not get to see for all that long last year. He suffered a season-ending shoulder injury, it was, after just 37 games. Only a 641 OPS in those games. But he did show us the one thing, which was elite contact ability. He was at 8% strikeout rate last year. This year, in 66 games, the strikeout rate is up, but still very good at 12%. It's helped him hit 275, a respectable 6 homers and 6 steals. And again, if we prorate that over the full 600 plate appearances, he's on pace for 13 and 13. So not a lot, but a guy who is regularly batting second or third in the lineup and is getting you to probable double digits in both homers and speed with a good batting average as well. Not going to be a key fantasy piece, but I think he's going to help a lot of rosters for several years.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent call out. And, I wouldn't say out on Jung-Hoo Lee, but I was really concerned about what he was going to do when he came back from that shoulder injury. As I already mentioned, with pitchers, shoulders are one of those things that I am super skeptical of how a player is going to return from that injury. And I should not have been skeptical in Jung-Hoo Lee's case. He is exactly who he showed himself to be when he started his MLB career before it got cut short by that injury. And he looks like a guy that I hope to have on more teams in the future. And I'm sure the draft cost will be very high.
Yeah, I would bet. Let's move on to what might be our final team, depending on timing here. The Philadelphia Phillies at 39 and 29. They are the 5th best team in the NL right now, 5 games back of the Mets for the top seed in the league and the division. And the highest earning Philly in 5x5 Roto this year has been Kyle Schwarber, who I can say I ranked ahead of Brent Rooker and Marcell Ozuna in that trio of DHs who are going pretty early in drafts. And I'm pretty happy with how that's going. Contract year Schwarber hitting 246, very solid batting average again. Already has 21 homers and 5 steals for some reason. A guy that you could be worried about as he starts heading into his mid-30s, but there's absolutely no sign of decline that I can see.
No sign of decline, and I'm actually not worried about Kyle Schwarber. Contract year or no contract year, DHs tend to age a little bit. Let me say this slightly differently. Elite designated hitters age slightly better than their position player counterparts because all they have to do is get up there, swing bat, hit ball. And we have known for his entire career that is something Kyle Schwarber does extremely well. There have been a couple of seasons where he's had very bad batted ball data. That's partially because of the shift. It's partially because of a couple of other things with his batted ball metrics and his hitting tendencies. But if his job is to hit you 40 home runs a year, I feel like he can keep doing that for a hot minute. And Schwarber's home runs are still light tower shots, right? Like the man hits for power and he understands how to take a walk. And that is what you are drafting Kyle Schwarber for, especially in an on-base percentage league. I find Kyle Schwarber to be one of the most interesting guys that you can possibly roster because everybody's thinking about his batting average and they're not thinking about the fact that he's a very good guy at getting on base and he's going to hit you a ton of home runs. He did lose a little bit of value this year by moving down in the lineup because he was no longer leading off for that Phillies team, but I think that he's making up for it in the power display that he's been putting on.
Yeah, he had over 100 runs for 3 straight seasons, but I think he's got a shot to get there again. I think he's on pace for it, and we'll see if he maintains it, but he's going to give you outstanding counting stats. And again, it doesn't look like he's going to kill your batting average. That was the thing. Some people smartly said, you know what, if you get 600, 700 plate appearances of a guy who's only hitting 205, that's hard to deal with, but I don't think you're going to get that. Looks like he's not actually a bottom of the scale batting average guy anymore. Who is a Philly that you want to devote a little extra attention to here?
So I think that, and I know that it's supposed to be most interesting Philly, and what I'm about to say is a little bit counterintuitive here. It is Zach Wheeler because he is so decidedly excellent and we just like never talk about it. He's one of my favorite players to roster. He's been a high roster guy for me for like the last 3 seasons in a row. The leagues where I have won, it has mostly been the leagues where Zach Wheeler was one of my first starting pitchers that I took off the board because he's so steady. He's so excellent. He's going to be a top 5, top 10 pitcher at almost any given time. And he's pitching for a great team that's going to get him the runs for him to rack up the wins. He is never going to put you in a position where you're worried about all these blowouts back to back to back. He's just like steady Eddie on the mound at all times. And I feel like Zach Wheeler deserves a little bit more love because we're sitting here talking about Tarek Skubal. We're talking about Paul Skeens. We're talking about all the pitchers with injuries. Well, the guy who hasn't been injured for like multiple seasons in a row and just is throwing elite strikeout stuff at all times is Zach Wheeler. That is a big secret to why the Phillies are where they are right now. So let's give Zach Wheeler more love.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, though. We've seen a whole bunch of pitchers get injured this season, as always, including guys who have spent several years not getting hurt. Let's say Zach Wheeler gets through this year and he reaches, 32 starts again for the 3rd straight season and is heading into his age 36 season next year. Are you going to give him a penalty in your rankings for the heavy workloads and for the age, or do you tend to treat pitcher age as less of a concern? They often, what happens is they don't fade away. They go strong and then they run into a wall and just break.
So I'm going to answer this slightly counterintuitively. The wheels are going to come off the wheel or bus at some point in time. But I think that at the most elite levels of the game, there are guys who can do things, and we know this for a fact because we've watched them do it for a long time, that just aren't being taken into account when you look at things like averages and regular numbers. And so I'm thinking specifically about like everybody was predicting the decline of Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander for like season after season after season after season. And yes, eventually you were right when they hit like their 40, 41, 42 season, but you missed out on the 36, 37, 38-year-old seasons, and those were pretty darn good. And I think that Zach Wheeler is in that caliber of pitcher. The fact that guys don't throw 200 innings consistently anymore doesn't mean that there aren't guys who, throughout baseball history, have thrown those 200 innings year after year after year. Go take a look at a Nolan Ryan baseball reference page and just blow your mind on the number of innings that guy threw. So I think that Zach Wheeler is in that elite category of pitchers where I'm going to believe in it until it breaks. And that means I might be a little bit more into 36-year-old Zach Wheeler than somebody else, but that's fine. I'll take the discount.
All right, fair enough. I want to discuss Christopher Sanchez one more time. I've been talking about him all year, but I want to check in on him and wonder whether or not we were sort of duped by his velocity addition this spring training. I was a big Christopher Sanchez fan even before the news came out that he was adding a couple ticks this spring because I thought he was already really good.
Same.
My position was he's already basically Framber Valdez and Logan Webb. You should draft him much closer to those guys. But then the word came out that he was adding a couple ticks of velocity. But if you look at his numbers, all right, the 3.10 ERA, that's a slight improvement on the 3.44 and 3.32 from last year. The strikeouts are up. The last two seasons, he was at 24 and 20%. This year, he's at 27. But the walk rate is up along with it. He's gone from 4 to 6 to 9%. And if you look at, say, the ERA estimators, it's basically the same guy in the end. He reaches the same place. It's still a very good place. But if he's kind of just the same guy, and we also had that forearm scare earlier in the season, I wonder, were we duped? Did we fall for something that wasn't actually as exciting as it is? Not that I'm saying Christopher Sanchez is not a good player. I just wonder, was he only ever as good as I thought he was before this velo bump?
I think that Christopher Sanchez is a super interesting pitcher. I've been in on him for a couple of seasons now, and I like what he brings to the table. I think it's sustainable. I am nervous about the walk rate situation that you're talking about there. I'm starting to try to reevaluate how we look at increased velocity and when it comes in a player's career and what that means for potential injury. And so I'm thinking back to some of the guys that we got super excited about adding velocity over the offseason, and they're hurt now. And it's just one of those situations where I wonder if added velocity is both a blessing and a curse. Like, yes, he's going to be better when he's pitching, and he's probably going to be hurt by the time we get to July. I'm hoping that's not true for Christopher Sanchez. But as you indicated, we've already seen some injury issues there. So I don't know. I feel like both of us are just like, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, how many hands are there for Christopher Sanchez? Probably 7 or 8. We could go back and forth on this all day. I'm happy where I have him on my teams, and I'm a little bit nervous that it's not going to last very long.
Yeah, I am quite nervous because, if he gets hurt, it also hurts my Phillies as well as half of my fantasy teams. I'll give you one other fact about Christopher Sanchez. He has had, I believe it's 5 games where his sinker didn't average 95 this season. One of the games was the game where he exited early with that forearm scare. The other 4 are his last 4 starts. Is that a guy who is pitching hurt, or is that a guy who is realizing he didn't need that velocity in the first place and he's going to be fine?
See, Christopher Sanchez doesn't strike me as the type of player who's gotten to the point where he is deliberately keeping his velo down or deliberately adjusting his game in that way. That is part of what makes me nervous there. I'm hoping there's no injury coming here, but I don't know. It makes me a little bit nervous.
All right, makes me more than a little bit nervous as well. I think we nearly are out of time here. We're not going to get to the rest of the top 10 teams in baseball. That would be the Padres, Blue Jays, and Astros, who round it out right now. But Sarah, how about one player from one of those 3 teams who you think deserves a little extra love?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Isaac Paredes because we all kind of knew that Isaac Paredes was going to a park that was absolutely going to be great for his 2025 fate. But I think that his match made in Houston is about as good as anybody could have possibly imagined. He already has 14 home runs on the season. He's got a 254 batting average, which is not going to kill you, but he's also getting on base at a 351 clip. And I just feel like the Isaac Paredes to Houston move really helped him out. It also helped their team out. And I think that he's currently on pace for another 30-plus home run season just by changing his park. And that's something you can bank on, right? I doubt that the Astros are going to deal him to someone else.
Yeah, it's nice when the line that every single fantasy analyst was saying, it seemed like over the offseason, comes true. He's perfect fit for the park, and guess what? He is. I'll give you one player from those 3 teams who's caught my eye. That's Alejandro Kirk of the Blue Jays. Somebody I've liked for years, but I guess was trying to talk myself out of. Excellent strikeout rates for years, combined with actually decent hard hit rates. He hit it on the ground too much, but still, it looked like a batted ball profile that should work. And now this year, it really is working. He's hitting .325, respectable enough. 5 homers should be able to get you maybe 12-ish by season's end. Striking out just 10% of the time. Has his best ever hard hit rate at 56%. Also has the ground ball rate down to 45%, which is certainly better than it was. It was in 50% range a couple years ago. Alejandro Kirk, you buying it?
I am buying it because honestly, like the decline of Alejandro Kirk seems to be the exception, not the rule. Alejandro Kirk has been a contact heavy, good hitting catcher at every level that we've seen him at, where he's been there. And he's had one and a half seasons where that really wasn't the case and everybody kind of freaked out about it. I think that you believe in a guy when he has demonstrated something as a skill set for most of his career, and you wonder why the 1 or 2 seasons are anomalous rather than believing he has become the anomalous guy. And Alejandro Kirk has always been a guy who can hit. So I believe he can hit.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's show because I got to let you get to your game with Alejandro Kirk 2.0, Moises Ballesteros, coming up in a few hours. Hopefully you get good weather for that one. But thank you very much for joining me, Sara. Why don't you remind our listeners where people can find your work?
Yeah, I'm at BCB_Sara on pretty much every social media site except Blue Sky, where they don't allow underscores. So I'm just at BCB Sara there. If you are looking for my Cubs writing, it's over at bleedcubbyblue.com, where I've taken most recently a look at the Cubs and who they're beating, who they're not, and what it might say for their postseason prospects. But also, if you're looking for my fantasy writing, it's over at Baseball HQ, where I'm writing the NL Central Playing Time Tomorrow column. Once a week, it comes out on Saturday.
All right. Thank you very much, Sara. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you to everybody who hung out in the chat. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Todd and Clay with 2 start pitchers here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.